Have you ever lost something you couldn't name but still carried everywhere with you? Have you ever woken up at 3 a.m., not because of a dream, but because silence feels louder when there's no war to drown it out? How do you explain to people that the bravest things you did are the very things you wish you could forget? Nathan Reeves had stopped talking about Iraq 8 years ago, and people had stopped asking long before that. He didn't need to tell them anyhow. His eyes did it for him. The way they avoided mirrors, the gutter in his posture, the tremble in his fingers when a car door slammed too hard behind him. In Fall River, Rhode Island, everyone knew him as the guy who used to be a Marine. Few knew his middle name. Fewer still knew about Sergeant Reyes, who had bled out in his arms at a burned checkpoint near Fallujah. And no one, not even the priest from St. Anne's over on South Main, knew about the girl in the lavender scarf whose scream still bounced off the inside of Nathan's skull every time he closed his eyes. His mornings were an odd sort of ritual. He'd wake before the sun rose, when there's enough dark left in the world to feel invisible. Coffee black as motor oil, one egg, scrambled but barely, the local radio station mumbling half-hearted country music in the background. Then he'd tighten his boots, the same kind he wore overseas, even though now he only walked the half-mile stretch to McGowan's Hardware. Same tan color, same creased leather, same mud-stained soles. They were too heavy for sidewalks. They said too much in silence, but he wore them anyway. Like a punishment or a protection, no one could really say. At McGowan's, he worked the back room, fixing busted snow shovels, rusted lawnmowers, and old carbide lanterns from fishermen who still believed in gas instead of LEDs. Pete McGowan, a third-generation owner with a gut like a keg and a handshake as firm as Sunday faith, didn't ask questions. Pete had given Nathan the job without an interview, and never once asked why the back door had to stay open, even in the cold, or why Nathan flinched if someone approached him from behind. Nathan rarely spoke, but when he did, it was the kind of dry wit that cut quick and deep. "Looks like this weed whacker got in a bar fight," he'd say, examining twisted blades and blood-red rust, then disappear back into his cave of tools. The other guys called him Ghost. Not to his face, though. He didn't mind. He probably didn't even hear them. Every third Friday at exactly 5:30 p.m. And he would walk down to Bellevue Park, a patchy green space with cracked basketball courts and an iron memorial bench etched with names in brass. That bench had his own name on it, tucked among 20 others. Operation Iraqi Freedom, honoring our sons and daughters. He hated it, hated the euphemism, the hollow pride, the way it turned bleeding into something burnished. But he went anyway and sat in front of it, as if hoping time might pull something out from between those letters and explain why the weight never changed. He didn't date. The idea seemed absurd to him now. What was he going to tell someone over dinner? That his last girlfriend had broken up with him because he cried in his sleep and punched holes in the drywall without remembering? That he hadn't watched a 4th of July fireworks show, not once, because they sounded like suppression fire if you closed your eyes just right. He volunteered, though, quietly. Once a month, he drove down to the local rec center and helped repair wheelchairs, handbikes, and walker frames for injured vets. He never said more than was needed. No camaraderie, no therapy group chit-chat with plastic coffee cups, but he worked fast and stayed late. Something sat at the edge of Nathan's reality, like a constant vibrating echo. In the way he couldn't stand the smell of diesel at the gas station, or how he instinctively memorized all the exits in every building he entered. In the way the 4th step in his apartment creaked, and that creak made him tense every single night. He didn't talk about that either. But then came that Tuesday. It was an afternoon like any other, Rhode Island sun slanting in sideways through the late summer haze. Nathan had just locked the back gate at McGowan's, cigarette barely lit between his fingers, when Pete hollered from behind the cash register, "Reeves, someone left something for you." Nobody ever left anything for him. Nathan trudged back inside, boots thudding with military metronomy, and found a small box on the counter, square and wrapped in tissue paper that looked like it had been scribbled over with crayons. No address, no name, just scrawled letters on the top. To the brave man with the sad eyes. His fingers hesitated. He peeled the paper slowly. Inside there was a drawing, childlike and uneven. It showed a soldier, big helmet, crooked smile, standing next to a smiling stick figure girl with yellow pigtails. They were holding hands amid what looked like explosions drawn as orange fireworks. Beneath it, written in blocky handwriting with reversed letters, were the words, "Thank you for keeping us safe. I think you're a hero. Lindsay, age 7. Nathan dropped the picture like it was burning. His chest felt like it caved in all at once, like that moment back in '07 when the Humvee blew out its side and the world spun backward. He staggered, knocking over the box cutter. Pete stepped forward, but Nathan had already pushed past him and was outside, gulping air like a man just surfaced from drowning. He hadn't cried in 9 years, but now he couldn't stop. For 10 whole minutes he stood there under the frightening silence of an ordinary sky, letting something inside him finally break, and from that fracture came a sound he hadn't heard in years, a sound that rose in his throat like prayer and pain and joy all at once. He laughed, a short, broken laugh that turned into a sob. Not because he thought he deserved the word hero. He didn't. He never would. But because for the first time since the war, someone saw him. Not as broken. Not as dangerous. Not as something society had chosen to quietly step around. Just as a man who tried. He wiped his face with thick palms, the memory of bullets still tangled in his fingertips, and stared at the crayon drawing as though it were a Bible verse. He didn't know this Lindsay, but she knew something about saving people, without firing a single shot. Nathan didn't know how long he stood outside McGowan's, the crayon drawing trembling in his hand like a leaf caught in a storm. The late summer air felt heavier now, thick with the scent of asphalt and distant sea salt, pressing down on him until his shoulders hunched as if carrying sandbags again. His eyes burned, not just from the tears that had already fallen, but from something deeper, something that had been clawing at the inside of his ribs for years. Hero. The word scrawled in a child's uneven letters felt like a blade, sharper than any shrapnel he'd ever pulled from his skin. He didn't deserve it. He couldn't deserve it. And yet there it was, staring up at him from the paper, as innocent and unrelenting as a child's belief. He folded the drawing with unsteady fingers and shoved it into the pocket of his faded jacket, the same one he'd worn every day since coming home, patched at the elbows from too many restless nights. His boots scraped against the gravel as he turned back toward the hardware store, but he didn't go inside. Couldn't. Pete was still there, probably watching from behind the counter with that quiet concern of his, the kind that didn't ask questions but still lingered like a shadow. Nathan didn't want to face that. Not now. Not when his chest felt like it had been cracked open, raw and exposed to the world. Instead, he walked. Down the cracked sidewalks of Fall River, past the old mill buildings with their boarded-up windows and rusted fire escapes, past the corner diner where the smell of burnt coffee and grease hung in the air like a memory. He didn't have a destination, not really. Just a need to move to outrun the echo of that word, hero, that kept ricocheting inside his skull. But no matter how fast he walked, it followed him, mingling with the other voices he could never quite silence. Sergeant Reyes coughing blood into the sand, his last words a garbled plea for Nathan to get out, just go. The girl in the lavender scarf, her screams cutting through the dust and gunfire, her small hands reaching for something, someone, he couldn't save. He squeezed his eyes shut for a moment, but the images only grew sharper, painted in cruel detail against the backs of his eyelids. He stopped at the edge of Bellevue Park, the same patchy green space where he sat every third Friday, in front of that cursed memorial bench. It was empty now, save for a few kids kicking a deflated soccer ball near the rusted hoop. The bench gleamed dully in the fading light, the brass names catching the last of the sun like tiny accusations. Nathan Reeves. Right there, etched among the others, as if his name belonged, as if surviving was some kind of honor. He didn't sit this time. He couldn't. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, the drawing in his pocket crinkling under the pressure. Why now? Why, after all these years of silence, did some kid, some Lindsay, have to drag this word out of the dark and shove it into his hands? He didn't want to be seen. He didn't want to be thanked. He just wanted to disappear into the cracks of this tired town, to be nothing more than the ghost they called him. But disappearing wasn't an option anymore. Not after that box, that drawing, those words. His throat tightened as he turned away from the bench, his boots scuffing against the uneven grass. He needed answers. Who was Lindsay? How did she know him? How could a 7-year-old look at a man like him, a man who couldn't even look at himself and see anything worth thanking? The questions gnawed at him, each one a splinter under his skin, and he knew he couldn't let them fester. Not this time. The next morning, Nathan woke before the sun, as always, but the ritual felt different. The coffee tasted bitterer, the egg stuck in his throat, and the radio's country twang grated on his nerves like a wire brush. He tightened his boots with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, the laces slipping through his fingers twice before he got them right. At McGowan's, he didn't head straight to the back room like usual. Instead, he lingered near the counter, waiting for Pete to finish ringing up a customer buying a bag of nails and a cheap flashlight. "Pete," Nathan said, his voice rough, like he hadn't used it in days. "That box yesterday, you see who dropped it off?" Pete looked up, his bushy eyebrows knitting together as he scratched the back of his neck. "Nah, man. It was just there when I came back from the storage shed. Thought maybe one of the regulars left it." "Why, something wrong?" Nathan shook his head, though the motion felt like a lie. "Just curious. Kid's drawing. Didn't expect it, is all." Pete studied him for a moment, his eyes narrowing just enough to show he wasn't buying the casual tone. But he didn't push. Never did. "Well, if I hear anything, I'll let you know. You good, Reeves?" "Yeah," Nathan muttered, already turning away. "I'm good." He wasn't. Not even close. The day dragged on, each tick of the clock in the back room a hammer against his thoughts. He fixed a broken chainsaw, replaced the blade on a circular saw, and oiled a set of hinges. But his mind wasn't on the work. It was on that drawing, on the weight of it in his pocket, on the way it seemed to burn through the fabric and into his skin. He kept replaying the moment he'd opened the box, the way his chest had caved in, the way he'd laughed and sobbed all at once. And beneath it all, the guilt. Always the guilt. It was a living thing inside him, a beast that fed on every quiet moment, every fleeting thought of peace. He didn't deserve to be called a hero. He hadn't saved Reyes. He hadn't saved that girl in the lavender scarf. He hadn't even saved himself. By midday, he couldn't take it anymore. He told Pete he was stepping out for a smoke, but instead of lighting up, he walked down to the rec center where he volunteered once a month. It wasn't his usual day, but he needed something, anything to anchor him. The center was a squat brick building near the edge of town, its walls plastered with faded posters for community events and veterans support groups. Inside, the air smelled of disinfectant and old gym socks, a combination that somehow felt comforting in its familiarity. A few guys were there, tinkering with wheelchairs and swapping stories over lukewarm coffee. Nathan nodded to them but didn't join in. He never did. He grabbed a set of tools and started working on a handbike with a busted chain, his hands moving on autopilot while his mind churned. "Hey, Reeves," called out a voice from across the room. It was Carl, a grizzled vet with a prosthetic leg and a laugh that sounded like gravel. "You're early this month. What's eating you?" Nathan didn't look up. "Nothing. Just had some time." Carl snorted, rolling his chair closer. "Bull. You got that look, man. Like you're carrying the whole damn desert on your back again. Spill it." Nathan's jaw tightened, his grip on the wrench faltering for a second. He didn't want to talk, didn't know how to. But Carl had a way of staring right through you, like he could see the cracks even if you hid them under layers of silence. Finally, Nathan sighed, setting the wrench down. "Got something yesterday. A drawing from a kid. Said I'm a hero." Carl raised an eyebrow, his weathered face softening just a fraction. "And that's a bad thing?" "It's a lie," Nathan snapped, the words sharper than he'd meant them to be. He rubbed a hand over his face, trying to rein in the heat rising in his chest. "I ain't no hero. I messed up over there. People died. People I should have saved. That kid don't know what she's saying." Carl was quiet for a long moment, his eyes drifting to the floor as if he were seeing something far away. Then he leaned forward, his voice low. "Maybe she don't. But maybe she sees something you don't. Kids got a way of cutting through the crap, you know. They don't care about the mess. They just see a guy who showed up." Nathan didn't respond. He couldn't. Carl's words hung in the air, heavy and unwelcome, stirring up the same storm that drawing had unleashed. He turned back to the handbike, his movements jerky now, but Carl didn't push further. just rolled back to his own project, leaving Nathan to wrestle with the noise in his head. That night, he didn't sleep. Not really. He lay on his lumpy mattress, staring at the ceiling of his cramped apartment, the fourth step creaking outside his door every time a neighbor passed by. Each creak was a jolt, a reminder of nights spent on edge, waiting for the next explosion, the next scream. He pulled the drawing out of his jacket pocket and unfolded it under the dim glow of his bedside lamp. The soldier with the crooked smile stared back at him, holding hands with the stick-figure girl. "Thank you for keeping us safe." The words blurred as his vision swam, not from tears this time, but from exhaustion, from the sheer weight of carrying this guilt for so long. He didn't notice the envelope at first. It had been tucked under the drawing, a small, plain thing with no name, no address, just a folded piece of paper inside. His hands hesitated, the same way they had with the box, but he opened it anyway. The handwriting was different from the child's scrawl, neater, adult, a woman's maybe. It read, "Nathan, I don't know if you'll remember me. I'm Lindsay's mom, Sarah. We met once years ago at the VA hospital in Providence. You fixed my brother's wheelchair when no one else could. Lindsay saw you there. She was only 3, but she remembers your soldier boots. For us, she's been drawing pictures of you ever since, calling you her hero. I didn't know how to reach you until someone at the rec center mentioned McGowan's. I hope this isn't too much. She just wanted to say thank you. So do I. Sarah." Nathan's breath caught, a sharp, jagged thing that stuck in his throat. The VA hospital. He remembered it vaguely, the sterile hallways, the smell of antiseptic, the way he'd kept his head down while working on wheelchairs for guys who'd lost more than he had. He didn't remember a little girl, didn't remember a woman named Sarah, but they remembered him. Enough to track him down, enough to call him something he wasn't. He dropped the letter onto the bed, his hands shaking now, not from anger but from something worse. Hope. A dangerous, fragile thing that he hadn't felt in years. It scared him more than the memories, more than the guilt. Because hope meant opening himself up again, letting someone in, and he didn't know if he could survive that. Not after everything. The next day he didn't go to McGowan's, couldn't. Instead he drove out to the VA hospital in Providence, a 40-minute trip that felt like a lifetime. The building loomed against the grey sky, all concrete and glass, a place that held too many ghosts for him to count. He parked near the entrance, his hands gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles whitened. He didn't know why he was here, didn't know what he expected to find. Sarah and Lindsay weren't likely to be waiting for him, and even if they were, what would he say? "Thanks for the drawing, but I'm not who you think I am. Sorry, but I can't carry this word you've given me." He got out anyway, his boots heavy on the asphalt, the same boots Lindsay had remembered from all those years ago. Inside, the hospital was as sterile as he remembered, the air thick with the hum of fluorescent lights and the murmur of voices. He didn't go to the front desk. Didn't ask for anyone, just walked the halls, his eyes scanning for something he couldn't name, until he reached the rehabilitation wing where he'd once volunteered. A few familiar faces nodded to him. Nurses, vets, guys he'd worked alongside, but he didn't stop to talk. He just stood there near a bulletin board covered in flyers for support groups and therapy sessions, feeling the weight of Sarah's letter in his pocket beside the drawing. That's when he saw her. Not Sarah, not Lindsay, but a woman about his age, maybe a little younger, with tired eyes and a clipboard clutched to her chest. She was talking to a nurse, her voice low, but something about her posture, tense, protective, caught his attention. When she turned, their eyes met for a split second, and he saw the flicker of recognition before she looked away. He didn't know her. Or did he? The uncertainty gnawed at him, a fresh wound on top of old scars. "Excuse me," he said before he could stop himself, his voice rough from disuse. She turned back, her expression guarded but curious. You Sarah?" Her brow furrowed, and she shook her head slowly. "No, I'm Ellen. Do I know you?" He felt the heat creep up his neck, the embarrassment of grasping at straws. "Sorry, thought you might be someone else, never mind." But she didn't let it go. Her eyes softened, searching his face like she was trying to place him. "Wait. You're one of the volunteers, right? From a while back? Fixed my dad's walker when the wheel kept jamming?" Nathan nodded, barely, his throat too tight to speak. Ellen stepped closer, her voice dropping. "I never got to thank you properly. That meant a lot to him. To me, he passed last year, but he always talked about the guy with the soldier boots who didn't say much but got the job done." There it was again. That word, unspoken but implied. Hero. Nathan felt the ground shift under him, the weight of her gratitude piling onto Lindsay's, onto Sarah's, until he could hardly breathe. He wanted to tell her she was wrong, that he wasn't worth thanking, that every good thing he'd done was drowned out by the bad, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he just nodded again, a jerky, awkward motion, and muttered, "Glad I could help." He turned to leave, his chest aching, but Ellen called after him. "Hey, if you're ever around, there's a group here on Thursdays, just guys talking. No pressure. Thought I'd mention it." He didn't respond, just kept walking, out of the rehab wing, out of the hospital, back to his truck. The drive home was a blur, the Rhode Island highways stretching out like endless grey ribbons, the skyline of Providence fading in his rearview mirror. He didn't want to join a group, didn't want to talk. But Ellen's words, like Carl's, like Sarah's letter, stuck to him like burrs, impossible to shake off. When he got back to Fall River, he didn't go home. He went to Bellevue Park again, to that damn bench with his name on it. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple, and the park was empty except for a lone jogger on the far path. Nathan sat this time, his hands clasped between his knees, the drawing and letter still in his pocket. He stared at the brass letters, at the names of men and women who hadn't come home, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel anger. Not entirely. There was something else there, something quieter, sadder, but not as heavy. Regret, maybe, or acceptance. He couldn't tell. He thought about Lindsay, about a little girl who saw a hero in a man who couldn't see one in himself. He thought about Sarah, tracking him down just to say thank you. About Ellen and Carl and all the people who'd seen something in him worth acknowledging, even when he couldn't. And he thought about Reyes and the girl in the lavender scarf and all the things he'd lost that he could never get back. The guilt was still there, a constant companion, but for the first time it didn't feel like the only thing. There was something else now, something small and flickering, like a match struck in the dark. He pulled out the drawing and smoothed it over his knee, tracing the crooked lines with a calloused finger. Then he made a decision. Not a big one, not yet, but a step. He'd find Sarah and Lindsay, not to tell them they were wrong, not to push their gratitude away, but to see them, to let them see him. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was the first crack in the wall he'd built around himself, the first chance to let something, someone, in. He stood folding the drawing carefully this time and tucked it back into his pocket. The park was dark now, the jogger long gone, and the air carried the faint chill of early fall. Nathan took one last look at the bench, at his name gleaming faintly in the twilight, and turned away. He didn't know what came next, didn't know if he could handle whatever waited on the other side of this choice, but for the first time in years, he was willing to find out. And hey, if you're feeling this story hit you right in the chest like I am, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. There's more to Nathan's journey, and I promise you won't want to miss how it ends. Let's keep walking this road together. Nathan started back toward his apartment, his boots echoing on the sidewalk, each step a little heavier, a little surer. He didn't have all the answers, didn't even have most of them, but he had a name, Sarah, and a place to start. And for now that was enough to keep moving forward, even if the past still clung to him like smoke, even if the guilt still whispered in his ear, even if the word hero still felt like a lie. He'd face it, not for himself, but for the little girl who'd drawn him a picture, who'd seen something worth saving in a man who'd long since given up on being saved. Nathan didn't sleep much the night after he decided to find Sarah and Lindsay. The weight of that choice pressed against him like a physical thing, heavier than the worn-out mattress beneath him or the creak of the fourth step outside his door. His apartment felt smaller somehow, the walls closing in with every tick of the cheap clock on his nightstand. He kept the drawing and Sarah's letter on the table beside him, their presence a quiet demand he couldn't ignore. By 4 a.m., Fanny gave up on rest, pulling on his jacket and boots in the dark, the leather creaking like an old friend who knew too much. He needed to move, to act, before the doubt could creep back in and choke this fragile flicker of purpose. He started at McGowan's that morning, not to work, but to ask Pete for any scrap of information about the box. His voice came out rough, like gravel scraped over sandpaper, as he leaned against the counter. "Pete, I need to know. That box, anyone mention anything after I left? A name, a face, anything?" Pete scratched his chin, his eyes narrowing with that familiar concern, but shook his head. "Sorry, Reeves. Nothing. It was just there, like I said. You sure you're all right? You look like you ain't slept since the Bush administration." Nathan forced a half-smile, the kind that didn't reach his eyes, and muttered, "I'm fine. Just need to find someone." But he wasn't fine. Every dead end felt like a punch, each unanswered question piling onto the guilt that already sat like a stone in his gut. What if he couldn't find them? What if he did, and they saw the truth, the broken man behind the hero they'd imagined? The thought gnawed at him, sharper with every passing hour, until his hands trembled as he poured his morning coffee, the black liquid spilling over the rim like his own unraveling nerves. He didn't stop, though. Couldn't. He drove back to the rec center after leaving McGowan's, the familiar brick building looming under a sky bruised with early fall clouds. Inside, the air was thick with the same disinfectant smell, the same low hum of conversation from vets swapping stories over stale donuts. Carl was there, perched on his chair near a workbench, and he caught Nathan's eye before he could slip away to a quiet corner. "Back so soon, Reeves. Thought you only haunted this place once a month." Nathan hesitated, his fingers tightening around the strap of his jacket. "Looking for someone, a woman named Sarah. Might have been here with a kid, Lindsay. You know him?" Carl tilted his head, chewing on the inside of his cheek as he thought. "Sarah, huh? Might ring a bell. There's a lady who comes by sometimes, helps with the family support group. Got a little girl with her, blonde, real chatty. Haven't seen him in a few weeks, though." "Why?" Nathan didn't answer, just nodded, the knot in his chest tightening. A lead, finally. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. He felt the clock ticking, not just on the wall, but inside him, each second a reminder of how long he'd carried this weight alone, and how much it would hurt if this hope, this tiny spark, snuffed out before it could catch. He stayed at the rec center longer than he meant to, asking around, his voice low and clipped as he spoke to anyone who might know something. Most shook their heads, their eyes flickering with curiosity or pity, and each no felt like a door slamming shut. By late afternoon, he was back in his truck, driving aimlessly through Fall River's narrow streets, past the sagging mill buildings and the diner with its flickering neon sign. His hands gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles whitened, the tension coiling tighter in his shoulders, his jaw, his chest. He didn't know where to go next. Didn't know if he could keep pushing when every step felt like wading through the same desert sand he'd left behind in Iraq. Endless, suffocating, with no horizon in sight. The drawing burned in his pocket, Lindsay's crooked soldier smiling through the fabric, and he wondered if he was chasing a ghost, a memory of something he'd never truly had. The doubt clawed at him, louder now, whispering that he didn't deserve this, that he'd failed them just like he'd failed Reyes, failed the girl in the lavender scarf. His breath came shallow, the cab of the truck feeling like a coffin, and for a moment he thought about turning back, about burying this whole thing under the weight of his silence once more. But then, as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the cracked asphalt, he saw a flyer taped to a lamppost near Bellevue Park. It was faded, curling at the edges, but the words caught his eye. Family Support Group for Veterans, every Wednesday, 6 p.m., Fall River Rec Center. His heart stuttered, a sharp, painful jolt. Wednesday. Today. He checked his watch. 5:47 p.m. There was no time to overthink, no time to let the fear win. He turned the truck around, the tires screeching against the pavement, and drove back to the rec center, his pulse hammering in his ears like artillery fire. He didn't know if Sarah would be there, didn't know if he could face her even if she was. But he had to try, had to know if this weight could shift, even just a fraction, before it crushed him completely. He parked crookedly outside the rec center, his boots hitting the ground before the engine had fully died. The building looked different now, the windows glowing with warm light against the deepening dusk, and as he pushed through the double doors, the murmur of voices washed over him. The support group was in a small room off the main hall, a circle of folding chairs occupied by a mix of tired faces, spouses, parents, a few kids coloring on the floor with crayons. Nathan stood in the doorway, his frame too large, too rigid, his hands shoved deep into his pockets to hide the tremble. He scanned the room, his eyes darting from face to face, until they landed on a woman near the back. She was in her 30s, maybe, with shoulder-length brown hair and a quiet, weary posture as she knelt beside a little girl with blonde pigtails. The girl was drawing, her tongue poking out in concentration, and Nathan knew. He knew before he even saw the woman's face, before she looked up and met his gaze with a flicker of surprise. Sarah and Lindsay. His throat closed up, the air in the room suddenly too thin. Sarah stood slowly, brushing her hands on her jeans, her expression shifting from confusion to recognition as she took a step toward him. Nathan. Her voice was soft, cautious, like she wasn't sure if saying his name would break something. He nodded, barely, his mouth dry as sand. Lindsay looked up then, her blue eyes wide and bright, and a grin split her face as she clutched her crayon tighter. "Mommy, it's him. It's the soldier man." Nathan felt the ground tilt beneath him, the weight of her words slamming into him harder than any IED. He wanted to turn away, to run from the light in her eyes, from the way Sarah looked at him with something like gratitude, something he didn't deserve. But he stayed rooted to the spot as Lindsay scrambled to her feet and ran toward him, her small hands clutching a new drawing. She stopped just in front of him, tilting her head back to look up at his towering frame, and held out the paper. It was another soldier, this one with a bigger smile, standing under a bright yellow sun. "I made this for you," she said, her voice high and clear, cutting through the fog in his mind. "Thank you for being a hero." The word hit him again, sharper this time, and he felt his knees buckle just slightly, his hand reaching out to take the drawing before he could stop himself. His fingers brushed the paper, and something inside him snapped, not with pain but with release, a dam breaking after years of holding back a flood. He looked at Sarah, who had come closer now, her eyes soft and searching. "I'm sorry if this is too much," she said quietly. "She's been talking about you for years. I wanted her to say thank you, and I wanted to too. What you did for my brother, back at the VA, it meant everything." Nathan swallowed hard, the lump in his throat burning. I'm not. He couldn't finish, couldn't find the words to tell her she was wrong, that he wasn't a hero, that he carried more blood on his hands than she could ever know. But Sarah shook her head, as if she could hear the unspoken. "You don't have to be perfect to help someone, Nathan. You showed up, that's more than a lot of people do." Her words were simple, but they cut deep, peeling back layers of guilt and shame he'd built up like armor. Lindsay tugged at his jacket then, her small hand insistent, and pointed to the drawing. "See? That's you. You're smiling because you're happy now." He looked down at the paper, at the soldier's exaggerated grin, and felt his chest crack open, raw and aching, but not entirely with pain. For the first time in years he felt seen, not as a ghost, not as a failure, but as a man who'd tried, even when trying felt like bleeding. He crouched down to Lindsay's level, his knees protesting, and forced his voice to steady. "Thank you, Lindsay. This means a lot." His words were clumsy, inadequate, but her face lit up like he'd given her the world. Sarah watched, a small smile tugging at her lips, and Nathan felt something shift inside him, something permanent. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, maybe not ever, but it was a start, a crack in the wall he'd built, wide enough to let a sliver of light through. He stood, folding the new drawing with the old one, and met Sarah's gaze again. "I'm glad I could help your brother," he said finally, the words heavy but true, "and I'm glad I got to meet her." Sarah nodded, her eyes glistening just slightly, and for a moment they stood there, three broken pieces of a world trying to fit together, if only for a second. The days that followed weren't easy, but they were different. Nathan didn't wake up at 3 a.m. every night anymore. Some nights, yes, but not all. The silence still felt loud, but it wasn't always a scream. He started going to the rec center more often, not just to fix wheelchairs, but to sit in on the Thursday group Ellen had mentioned. He didn't talk much at first, just listened. his hands clasped tight in his lap as other vets shared their scars, their losses, their small victories. But one week he spoke. Just a few words, rough and halting, about Reyes, about the girl in the lavender scarf, about the weight he couldn't put down. The room was quiet after, not with judgment but with understanding, and Carl clapped him on the shoulder as they left, a gesture heavier than words. Nathan felt the guilt still, always would, but it wasn't the only thing anymore. There was room now, a small space for something else, connection maybe, or the possibility of it. He changed his routine too. The boots stayed, but he polished them one Sunday, the first time in years, the leather gleaming under his careful hands. It wasn't about forgetting the mud, the blood, the sand. It was about carrying it differently, with a little less shame. He started eating breakfast at the diner sometimes, not just black coffee and a single egg at home, but pancakes with too much syrup, the kind Lindsay might like if she were there. He even smiled once at the waitress, a small, rusty thing, but real. And every third Friday he still went to Bellevue Park, still sat in front of that memorial bench with his name etched in brass, but he didn't stare at it with the same hollow anger. Sometimes he brought Lindsay's drawings with him, unfolding them on his knee, letting the crooked soldiers remind him that someone saw him, even when he couldn't see himself. There was a sacrifice too, though not one anyone else would notice. He stopped wearing his old dog tags, the ones he'd kept hidden under his shirt since coming home. The metal warm against his skin like a constant reminder of who he'd been, who he'd failed. One evening, under a sky streaked with the last gold of sunset, he took them off, the chain heavy in his palm. He didn't throw them away, couldn't do that, but he placed them in a small tin box, the kind his grandfather had used for fishing lures, and tucked it into the back of his closet. It wasn't a rejection of his past, not entirely, but a choice to let it rest, just for a while instead of wearing it like a noose. The absence felt strange at first, his chest lighter in a way that scared him, but he let it be. Let himself breathe without the weight of those tags pulling him under. Weeks later, on a crisp October morning, Nathan met Sarah and Lindsay again, this time by arrangement. They'd agreed to meet at a small playground near the rec center, a place with rusted swings and a slide that squeaked with every push. Lindsay ran ahead as soon as she saw him, her pigtails bouncing, and held up a new drawing, this one of the three of them, stick figures under a tree with lopsided leaves. Nathan took it with a nod, his throat tight, and watched as she darted toward the swings, her laughter cutting through the autumn air like a blade of sunlight. Sarah sat beside him on a weathered bench, her hands wrapped around a thermos of coffee, and they didn't speak much at first, didn't need to. The silence between them wasn't heavy, not like the kind he'd carried for years. It was just there, a space to exist in. He glanced at Lindsay, her small frame pumping the swing higher, her joy so pure it hurt to look at. And in that moment, under the grey Rhode Island sky, with the smell of fallen leaves sharp in the air, Nathan felt something settle. Not peace, not fully, but a kind of quiet that didn't ache. He thought about time, how it didn't heal, not really, but how it carved out spaces, hollows where you could plant something new if you dared to try. He thought about war, how it took and took until you were nothing but echoes, but how even echoes could find a voice again, given enough patience. And he thought about Recomeso, though he didn't know the word for it, only the feeling. A starting over, not from scratch, but from the ruins, brick by broken brick. If this story has tugged at your heart the way it has mine, I'd love to hear from you. Comment below with, "I believe in second chances," if Nathan's journey resonates with you. Share this with someone who needs a reminder that healing, even in small steps, is possible. And hey, hit that subscribe button if you want to walk alongside more stories like this. We've got a long road ahead, and I'd be honored to have you with us.